The dust tastes like iron and defeat. The ragged breath of the horse beneath you is a death rattle, each gasp a countdown. You can't hear the men hunting you, but you feel them. They aren't just behind you. They're a mathematical certainty, an equation of exhaustion closing in. For the man they called Kid Cury, this wasn't just a chase. On June 9, 1904, in the rugged canyons of Colorado, he wasn't running from lawmen. He was running from math. And math was about to win. The sweat plastering his shirt to his skin wasn't just from the sun, it was the cold sweat of a man trapped in a problem with only one final solution. According to the official story, it was a solution he'd find with his own gun, pressed to his own temple. But even that is part of the legend, because the true identity of the man who died that day remains a fierce debate among historians. This is the story of the frontier's most brutal and effective weapon. Not the Colt, not the Winchester, but the grim, calculated certainty of the fresh horse relay. Just 2 days earlier, the world still felt like it belonged to men like Harvey Logan, better known as Kid Cury. He was the wildest of the wild bunch, a ghost who had escaped a Knoxville jail just a year prior. A man with a reputation for killing lawmen and disappearing into the landscape. On the moonless night of June 7, 1904, Cury and 2 accomplices put that reputation to work. Near Parachute, Colorado, they forced the Denver and Rio Grande train to a screeching halt. The plan was classic Wild Bunch, swift, audacious, and built on speed. They ordered the engineer to move the train to an isolated spot called Straight Flats, uncoupled the express car, and went to work. After the robbery, they vanished into the night. Their escape was meticulous, at least at first. They used a stolen rowboat to cross the Colorado River where fresh horses were waiting. To buy more time, they cut the telephone wires, a small act of defiance against the technology that was rapidly shrinking their world. It was a smart move, the kind that had worked for years. But the world was changing. A local rancher named Banta quickly repaired the severed line. With a few cranks of a handle and a few frantic words, the trap was set. The clock had started ticking, not on the posse, but on Kid Cury. He just didn't know it yet. The legend of the Old West chase is one of a desperate, hell-for-leather gallop across the plains. That's mostly a myth. By the turn of the 20th century, chasing an outlaw had become a science. It was a cold, logistical problem, and the solution was the fresh horse relay. It was a system pioneered by mail services like the Pony Express, which used a network of stations to move mail 2,000 miles in just 10 days. Riders would swap for a fresh horse every 10 to 15 miles, ensuring their mount was always at peak strength. Lawmen and posses adapted this brutal efficiency for their own purposes. While the man believed to be Kid Cury was running his first horse into the ground, a posse of 40 men was being raised from Grand Junction to New Castle. They weren't panicked. They weren't riding at a full gallop. They didn't have to. The posse's strategy was to become a relentless, slow-moving wall of attrition. They rode at a steady trot, a gait a horse can maintain for hours, sometimes covering 20 miles before needing a rest. They knew something the outlaws were learning the hard way. A single horse, especially an unconditioned one, has its limits. When pushed into a frantic gallop, a horse can typically only maintain that top speed for 2 to 3 miles before fatigue starts to poison its muscles. Stretch that out, and the animal just breaks down. The posse didn't need to be faster. They just needed to exist, swapping to fresh mounts while the fugitive destroyed his only one. The first signs of trouble for the outlaws came as the sun rose. Their pre-staged horse, pushed hard through the night, was faltering on the rugged terrain of Battlement Mesa. The animal's powerful sprint dwindled to a labored canter, then a stumbling trot. The horse had hit its limit. Desperate, Cury and his men made a fatal mistake. They stole fresh mounts from a ranch belonging to a man named Rolla Gardner. This did 2 things. First, it gave them a temporary reprieve. Second, and more importantly, it made the crime personal. Stealing from the railroad was one thing. Stealing a man's horse was a deep violation in the West. It enraged the locals and brought Rolla Gardner himself into the posse, a man who now had a personal stake in their capture. But even with new horses, the math was inescapable. They were still pushing their animals to the breaking point, while the posse behind them maintained its implacable energy-saving pace. Soon the second set of horses began to fail. After a furious ride, Cury's gang arrived at the Banta Ranch on Mam Creek, on foot. Their horses were done. In a surreal moment of civility, they paid $1 for breakfast, then stole 3 more horses from the barn. Every stop, every horse theft, was a victory for the posse. It was time lost. It was distance the posse closed without having to quicken their pace. They didn't need bloodhounds, they just had to follow the trail of broken-down horses. The outlaws were caught in a brutal cycle. Run a horse to death, steal another, and repeat, all while the posse, a slow-moving tide, just kept coming. They had covered nearly 80 miles in 2 days, a punishing distance for any horse in that terrain. The man they were chasing was no longer just an outlaw. He was a fugitive from a biological certainty. On June 9th, the inevitable happened on East Divide Creek. A 6-man team from the main posse, including rancher Rolla Gardner, crested a ridge and saw the 3 outlaws below. Cornered, their horses once again spent, Cury and his men scrambled on foot into a cluster of rocks to make their last stand. Defiant, the lead outlaw yelled at the posse to back off. A furious exchange of gunfire erupted. The outlaws were deadly. A bullet grazed one posse member's cheek. The man identified as Cury shot the horses out from under Rolla Gardner and another posseman. But as he stepped up to take another shot, Rolla Gardner, now on foot and taking cover behind his dead horse, fired his .38-55 rifle. The bullet tore across the outlaw's chest, shattering bone and ripping through his arm. It was a mortal wound. He knew it. One of his companions yelled, "Are you hurt?" His reply was the sound of a man who had finally finished the math. He saw the posse closing in, felt the life bleeding out of him, and understood there was no escape. "Don't wait for me," he said. "I'm all in and might as well end it right here." With those words, the man believed to be Harvey Kid Cury, the wildest of the wild bunch, raised his revolver to his right temple and pulled the trigger. The single final shot echoed through the canyon. When the posse cautiously approached, they found him dead. His 2 companions had vanished, but the man they were all hunting was finished. The era of the lone outlaw was over, not just because of lawmen, but because of logistics. The West was being tamed by telephone lines, railroad schedules, and the simple, brutal arithmetic of a horse's endurance. The man at Divide Creek wasn't just outgunned. He was outcalculated. Whether it was truly Kid Cury or another desperate outlaw, his final act was a grim acknowledgement that in the New West you could never, ever outrun the math.